Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. We'll allow some time for folks to trickle in and we'll begin shortly at 6:05. All right. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Nabrat Sharif, and I serve as a domestic policy analyst at MGH Foundation. We appreciate you all for taking the time to be with us for this important conversation on Florida's new domestic terrorism designation law. Since these bills were signed into law, we've heard many questions from our community members, our advocates, our students, faith leaders, and organizations just trying to understand what these laws actually do and what their implications may be moving forward. And to help frame our discussion tonight, I want to briefly explain what these bills do, though, of course, our panelists will dive much deeper into them through the course of our webinar. First, HB 1471 creates a new process for Florida to designate groups as domestic terrorist organizations, while HB 1473 limits public access to some of the information used in making those designations, meaning that the public may not always know how those decisions were reached. Earlier this year, I had the opportunity to spend time in Tallahassee during Florida's legislative session while these bills were actually moving through the legislature, and even then, it was clear that they would raise questions about constitutional rights and government accountability. With so much conversation happening around these bills right now, we felt it was important to create an opportunity to hear directly from legal and policy experts about what's actually in this legislation and what's at stake. Before we formally begin, I'd also like to extend my thanks to our panelists this evening. We're joined by criminal defense and civil rights attorney and founding member of MGAGE, Khurram Wahid, along with Florida Representative Dodi Joseph. Thank you both so much for taking the time to join us and sharing your expertise with us for this important discussion. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague and our moderator, Adam Abuta, Organizing Manager for MGAGE Florida, who will formally introduce our panelists and guide tonight's conversation. Adam, over to you.
Thank you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you very much, Navrat, for opening up this panel and the kind introduction. To begin with intros on our panelists, Representative Dottie Joseph is a Democratic member of the Florida House of Representatives, now wrapping up her fourth term and representing District 108 within Miami-Dade County. Rep. Joseph is a seasoned civil rights attorney. She's built her career both inside and outside of the legislature on defending constitutional rights, advancing human dignity, and protecting communities too often targeted by discriminatory or overreaching policies. Since her first election, Rep. Joseph has been known as a consistent, principled voice for justice and good governance and bringing clarity, courage, and legal expertise to some of the most consequential debates in Tallahassee. Her work reflects a deep commitment of safeguarding civil liberties and ensuring that state power is exercised with accountability and respect for due process. During this year's legislative session, Rep. Joseph emerged as one of the strongest and most steadfast opponents of the domestic terrorism designation bills. She challenged these measures at two key committee stops, the first being the Civil Justice and Claims Subcommittee and the Judiciary Committee, and again on the House floor. She had raised critical concerns about constitutional overreach, civil rights implications, and the potential for abuse. Her leadership on this issue is part of a long pattern in which time and time again, Rep. Joseph has stood firmly on the right side of complex, high stakes policy fights in defending Floridians' rights across or against expansive policing and government intrusion. Rep. Joseph, to conclude, it continues to serve as a powerful moral and legal voice in the legislature, working tirelessly to build a more just, inclusive, and accountable Florida. And to close out my introduction of Rep. Joseph, I do have the absolute honor to share some very, very exciting news. That as of this morning, Rep. Joseph has both filed and qualified to run for governor for the great Sunshine State of Florida. And just much love and appreciation for all that you've done since first being elected. Um, with that, introducing Khurram Wahed, he, as mentioned, is a nationally recognized attorney, a leading authority on constitutional rights, civil liberties, and national security law. As a founding member and former national chair of Engage Action, he helped build one of the most influential Muslim American civic engagement organizations in the country, expanding political participation and strengthening democratic involvement across diverse communities. Khurram's legal career spans decades of high impact work defending individual rights, challenging government overreach. He has represented clients in complex, often precedent setting cases involving surveillance, free speech, due process, and the balance between national security and civil liberties. His expertise has made him a sought after advocate, educator, and commentator of the real world consequences of expansive policing and security powers. Beyond the courtroom, Khurram has been instrumental in empowering underrepresented communities, fostering civic leadership, and ensuring that American Muslims have a meaningful voice in public life. His work reflects a deep commitment to the constitutional principles that protect all Americans. Tonight, he brings a critical legal and civic perspective to the discussions of Florida's newly enacted police state bills, a perspective shaped by years of confronting the intersection of security policy, civil rights, and democratic accountability. With that, to kick off um, the first question for Representative Joseph, and then we'll give it to Khurram, is Rep. Joseph, for those that are hearing about these laws for the very first time, what exactly does HB 1471 and HB 1473 do? And how does the designation process work?
Sure. So HB 1471 creates a process for Florida to designate certain organizations as domestic terrorist organizations. That decision starts with the chief of domestic security, who is appointed by the governor, then goes to the governor and the cabinet for approval. Once an organization is designated, there can be serious consequences tied to membership, support, public funding, schools, universities, and students. So that's the first one. HB 1473 is connected because it allows parts of the state's written explanation for a designation to be kept from the public for security reasons. So it's the public records accompaniment to the other bill. So simply put, one bill creates a designation process and the other allows some of the information behind that decision to basically be withheld from the public.
Mm, Thank you very, very much for that. Khurram, same question for you, and if there's anything that you would add to what 1471 and 1473 do, as well as the process itself. I think you're still on mute.
Sorry, I'm used
There
to
we
being
go.
in court where you're on mute until you get to talk. Uh, so I think the only thing I really want to add is that it's very interesting that there was 1473, which is essentially a way to keep the process in secret. So while there's a process that Rep. Joseph laid out, we don't really get to know what that process is now in terms of the actual evidence that they're going to use to make these decisions because of 1473. So I think it's critically important to understand that in the Sunshine State, that they have deliberately, in this one case, decided to shield it from the sun. So otherwise, and it's also important to know that while you can challenge a designation, you have to be knowing that you have to know you got designated, and they just sort of put it out in the Florida registry. So you may or may not know, and you have a very limited period of time to begin the administrative challenge for you to then subsequently be able to bring a challenge in court. So there's some steps here that were taken to not only create secrecy, but to really prevent due process, in my opinion.
Mm. A question that kind of delves into that point is, how does Florida's new designation system differ from existing federal terrorism laws? And why have advocates raised constitutional concerns with this?
So right now, the way it works is that there is a way for an entity to be designated as a terrorist entity by the United States government. And we give that power to the federal government because generally what we're talking about is foreign organizations, right? So the State Department has the ability to go through a process where they will say, okay, X entity, we're going to deem it a terrorist organization. And with that designation comes certain consequences. And one of the key consequences, and the reason we really have such a designation, is so that we can go after their funding. And the IRS has a thing called the Office of Foreign Asset Control, OFAC, OFAC. And it's a list of specially designated and blocked entities and persons. And so once you're on that list, and the only way to get on that list is state first has to designate you, and then Treasury says, okay, we will now take that designation and apply it through our mechanisms and tell the world, don't do any money transactions with these individuals or entities. So it's a very powerful tool for the government to do that. But we leave it to the federal government because we're dealing with international issues. We don't want it domestically, something like that, because we're concerned that it runs afoul of the First Amendment, the ability to speak one's mind against our own government, the ability to associate with folks who might be opposed to our government. So we keep it as a foreign thing, and it's 18 U.S. Code 2339 capital A, and you can charge people domestically with that code and as a terrorist organization for the actions they do. If the actual actions they do are in line with the definition of terrorism, you can charge an entity here in the United States with that. And there's 18 U.S. Code 2339B, which is specifically for foreign terrorist organizations. So we already have a law that handles this. And there's been years and years and years of litigation around these to try and do its best to try to navigate the First Amendment issues. The problem we have here is that you have a lot of vagueness in definitions, and we can talk about it more as we go along, but the most concerning problem with this bill is that it really targets, in a big section of it, students. That's not something that the State Department designates. It's not something that Treasury designates. It is something that Florida decided to designate because it had a problem, which is it had students advocating for things that the reigning power in Florida didn't want people advocating for on campuses. And so they created this bill, really, which very, very clearly uses the term promote. It promotes terrorism, and the definition of promote, which we can get into, is extremely vague and problematic. So this statute is very different than federal terrorism laws, and it was unnecessary because you already have federal terrorism laws that could be used against real domestic terrorists.
Thank you very, very much for that. Which also just leads to a good transition question to Representative Joseph is looking at how state governments work in practice. What concerns do you have about how this designation authority could be used and how much oversight exists before consequences actually take effect?
Ugh, my concern is what happens after a designation is made and whether there are enough safeguards in place before those consequences take effect. So, for many students and young people watching, some of the most significant consequences are the ones that affect education. Under HB 1471, students found to have promoted a designated organization could face expulsion, loss of financial aid, and for some international students, potential immigration consequences. Schools, colleges, and universities would also face new restrictions on programs, activities, and the use of public funds. The bill also allows designated organizations to lose access to public funding and government contracts, as well as the Florida Nonprofit Organization could ultimately be dissolved, right? So those are some pretty serious consequences. It creates criminal penalties related to material support and certain forms of membership as well. So there's the financial consequences, there's the educational consequences, and of course the criminal consequences. Those are pretty serious. So public safety is important, and terrorist activity has no place in our communities, in my opinion. But when a small group of officials has the authority to trigger these kinds of consequences that have they're far reaching before a full court review, and an organization only has 30 days to challenge that designation in court. So I think it's fair to ask whether there are enough safeguards, transparency, and due process protections built into the process. For me, the answer is no. So the question here should be whether we have struck the right balance between public safety and protecting people's rights, educational opportunities, and the ability to participate in civic life.
Mm. Thank you very, very much for your response on that. I do want to know before we continue that we will be taking Q&A from the audience as we get closer to around 6:40. Just to get back on track, the next question is for you, Khurram. The law, it includes extensive language that discusses Sharia, even though courts are already prohibited from applying any law in violation of constitutional rights. Why does that language matter from a legal perspective?
So when there's going to be a challenge to any statute, um, one of the things that courts can look at is legislative intent, right? And is this a neutral law, or is this law unequal? Is it trying to target a specific group? And we can look at it on its face, and you can see that the only sort of religious law that it calls out is Sharia, even though halakha is the exact same thing, does not mention that. And if you look at the other examples, there's a bunch of whereas clauses. And if you look at those, it's really saying, it's targeting things like, the things that would be anathema to America. And it talks about, the weight of a woman's testimony in court. And we know that in Islam and under Sharia law, there's a difference in men versus women in terms of, how many women versus men in terms of testimony in court under that system. Mind you, both in Talmudic law and in biblical law, women were not allowed to testify in court at all. So all of that context is lost. But the only thing they call out is Sharia. So it's a very important when it comes down to figuring out when you're suing, whether or not its legislative intent to start with was to target Muslims. And if they go around designating Muslim individuals or institutions, then that'll absolutely come to play. I think it's very clear where this came from. Representative Hillary Cassell was the one who brought this when she first brought a version of this. And you know, because you were involved with advocating to try and stop it, it was the Sharia bill. It's literally what it was called. And its goal was to stop Sharia law from being used in Florida. It's never been done anywhere in the country, let alone in Florida. It's not allowed. You know, the U.S. Constitution rules, Florida Supreme Court, the Florida Constitution, then Florida Supreme Court, and then Florida courts. That's the order. So this was a made-up thing to start with, and it was not really getting the traction I think she wanted. And then this came about, and it turned into this domestic terrorism law. So we know exactly where it came from, what its intent was. And when this gets challenged in court, that's going to be something that can be used to challenge it.
Thank you. Thank you. Representative Joseph, we'll pose this question to you first and then to Khurram. Are there broader implications beyond Muslim communities? Who else should be paying attention to this law and why?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, it directly impacts the Muslim community because of the language of the bill, but it has significantly broader concerns beyond just that one community. So, advocacy groups, nonprofits, student organizations, faith communities, journalists, educators, civil rights organizations should all be paying attention. HB 1471 creates consequences tied to terms such as material support or resources, membership, and the promotion of designated organizations. The law also extends consequences to schools, universities, students. So that's why Muslim civic organizations, faith-based organizations, student groups, nonprofits, and all the groups we talked about earlier need to be paying attention, because the verbiage, while it expressly targets Muslim communities, the implications go beyond Muslim communities. And if we're paying attention to what's going on with the Southern Poverty Law Center, it's a similar kind of mechanism. They're using the power of the state to weaponize it against people who are espousing ideas that the current administrations, either federal or at the state level, do not agree with for whatever reason. And it's a direct frontal assault on our First Amendment rights. And I'll add this last piece. They may start with the Muslim community, but I guarantee you it will not end there, right? We have a saying, when Black America, when America has a cold, Black America experiences pneumonia. So this in this context is like that, starting with the Muslim community, and we have to understand the interconnectedness of this kind of supremacy.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much for that response. Khurram, is there anything you'd add to that? And again, are there broader implications beyond the Muslim community? And who else should be paying attention to this law and why?
So anyone who really wants to, and especially student groups who really want to voice their political opinions that are unpopular to the current reigning authority, right? Because you're going to have, for example, I would be completely not shocked if they designate Antifa. I would be completely not shocked if they want to designate a Care Florida. I would be completely not shocked. And all the groups that are kind of out there fighting current authority, not in any violent way, I would be not surprised at all if they get designated, because the language is so broad. I mean, I'm just going to read out of it, because it says that essentially you can get designated if you're a student, if you're promoting foreign or domestic terrorist organizations as designated by the Florida Administrative Register. Okay, so what is promoting? If I am advocating on behalf of the people of Gaza, am I promoting a designated terrorist organization, Hamas? Some people say yes, some people say no. If the 5 folks in the cabinet say yes, well, then I guess it's yes in this world. What if promotion includes, and this is important, making statements or taking action, supporting, encouraging, approving. So even your words are going to be used against you. And that's the purpose here, right? It is to chill dissent. And anyone who wishes to dissent should be thinking that they might be affected by this.
Mm. This next question, it goes into the piece that you've just spoken to. I'm not sure if your words would change or not on this, but what message do you believe that these provisions send beyond the Muslim community? And again, as you'd mentioned, to student organizations and other minority groups, and how might these laws shape future policymaking and enforcement practices and really the overall climate for civil liberties across these communities?
Yeah, it's the chilling effect. I mean, it's very clear what they're trying to do. They're trying to shut down dissent. You know, they say, well, you're gonna get tagged if we think you're promoting a foreign terrorist organization, and your own words is enough. You don't have to have done anything. Words will do it. Promote involves supporting violence. So if you're talking about, you know, those who are being oppressed and that they should resist and you support them resisting, is that enough? Are those words enough? Is that promoting violence? And you got to go through a process that you know, you're not going to know anything about. It's a secret process. You're not a part of it. You can get designated. If you're a student, you can get tagged, your visa pulled, you can get deported. When are you going to be able to challenge that? When will you have the resources to challenge that? It is fraught with authoritarianism, quite frankly. And so, yeah, I think people need to take this very seriously. Those on both sides of the political aisle, folks who are left and right, it doesn't matter. Because if you're giving this government such unfettered secret power, you're giving every government that comes after it such unfettered secret power. So we should all be thinking collectively and not thinking what side of the political aisle I am when we're looking at these types of clearly unconstitutional actions by any government.
Mm. Okay, thank you. This next question, I'll give it to you first, and then we'll go back to Rep. Dottie. Joseph, is even if a designation is eventually overturned, what impact could it have on an organization and its supporters in the meantime?
So there's a couple of things there, right? Let's first talk about the overturning part, right? There's 2 ways this can be legally challenged. There's the on its face. So facially, is it either too vague or overbroad or in some way doesn't create enough guidance to the rest of us, the people, to know whether we'll run afoul of it or not, right? So we might run afoul of a law and we don't know that a particular conduct could have us run afoul of it. For example, if we protest, if we are part of Black Lives Matter, or are we going to get tagged as part of a foreign terrorist organization? We wouldn't know. So there's on its face, is it too vague or overbroad or unclear? So it does not give us notice of how we might run afoul of the law. And that's one way. And the First Amendment Foundation right now is getting ready to file such a lawsuit that their membership and folks here should consider just go give them $5 or sign up for their email list or whatever it is to become a member, to make sure that they have, you know, enough folks from our community as well and other, you know, student groups and everybody who are part of that, so that when they say that they and their members are going to you know, potentially run afoul of this lawsuit and therefore they have standing, that they have real legal support for that. And then the other way is you could run afoul of this law, that the law could be challenged is as applied. So it could be that, okay, you could say, as applied to me, this law is unconstitutional because all I did was say, hey, I think I support the people of Gaza and they have the right to, you know, have their own autonomy and they should resist oppression. And then I get tagged. So did I really run afoul of it or not? And so then I would challenge it that way. So those are the two ways that one could challenge this, and we're going to see that happening. And then what are the consequences while those challenges are going on? Reputational challenge. If you're a foreign student, you might be sent back to your country by the time any challenge could be happening. Of course, it has a chilling effect, as we talked about, on freedom of speech, on association. Are you going to join an organization that gets hit with a designation, even if they're suing to undesignate themselves and to fight that? Are you going to join that? Or are you going to be like, hey, I'm not going to support them for now? I mean, this is all very political ultimately. And that's the problem. This is not about criminal conduct or justice or making our communities safer. It's about creating a political tool to squash any sort of dissent and control behavior in a way that those in charge believe the behavior should be controlled.
Thank you, Rep. Joseph. On that same question, is there anything that you would expand on or address differently in being that even if a designation is eventually overturned, what impact could it have on an organization and its supporters in the meantime?
Yeah, I mean, I think most of it was covered. I would just add, by the time, like once it's eventually overturned, the damage would have already been done, right? Organizations will lose their donors, partnerships, volunteers, trust in some cases. Um, Community members will be hesitant to participate, right? It will have the chilling effect that the legislation was designed to have. People won't want to be associated with the organization. They don't want to be deemed a terrorist themselves, right? And for smaller organizations, and community groups, it's really hard to recover from that kind of disruption. By the time the court reaches the final decision, the effects of the designation may have already been felt, or the organization may not exist anymore. We saw something similar with what they did with the NAACP, both here in Florida, but also in other states, right? Like they would designate them as a problem in whatever form, whether they're calling it a terrorist organization or some other organization that makes it difficult to associate with, because they dare speak out against what's going on. So, for me, that raises an important question. What happens to people connected to that organization in the meantime? We have seen throughout history how fear and broad labels can unfairly impact entire communities. In Buffalo, the Muslim community recently mourned Aisha Abdullah and her young sons, Youssef Saif Mohammed, whose death deeply affected Buffalo's Muslim community and the Yemeni communities, right? In San Diego, you have Amin Abdullah, Nadir Awad, and Mansour Kazia, who were killed in a deadly attack on a mosque. And authorities are investigating that as a hate crime motivated by anti-Muslim extremism. So my concern in terms of how that has impacts beyond is our words have consequences. Our legislation and how we attack and put targets on the backs of certain communities has real life consequences. So it's not just that HB 1471 specifically targets one faith community, one faith or one community. The concern is that the precedent created when the government gains the authority to label organizations to impose significant consequences before lengthy legal challenges can be resolved. So when fear and suspicion replace facts, innocent organizations, families, students, and faith communities will face the scrutiny, lose opportunities, suffer relational harm, reputational harm, relational harm, and we absolutely confront violent extremism wherever it exists, but we must do so in a way that protects public safety, preserves due process, religious freedom, the constitutional rights for every Floridian, right? So it's not picking and choosing who has First Amendment rights. Everybody should have them. So these laws target and sequester some people's rights based on religion or perceived, group affiliation, and that's problematic. So the question is not only who may be affected today, but whether the safeguards are strong enough to prevent the unintended harm tomorrow.
Mm.
Was
On
that
that,
too?
my next on that hit it right on the nail. It's always nothing but just always very much so on par. Very, very much so appreciate your words, as always. But then my next question for you, Rep. Joseph, would be that beyond the courts, what role can elected officials play in protecting civil liberties as these laws are implemented?
Sure. Part of our job as elected officials is listening to people affected by these decisions, paying attention to what's happening on the ground. If community members, students, faith leaders, advocacy organizations are raising concerns, we have a responsibility to ask the questions and make sure that these concerns are being addressed. Okay, fine. Um, we may not always agree on every issue, but we should agree that people deserve to be treated fairly and that those with power are held accountable, not just to their words, but their actions and the consequences of both their words and their action. Now, at different levels of elected officials, there are different ways that you engage in this process. Obviously, the people central to this process are going to be the designated terrorist or the chief guy or whatever that title is, I forgot now already, who's appointed by the governor. So the governor is a key figure here, and the members of the cabinet, right? So when we're looking at who can directly impact those things, the governor is front and center in all of this. So if we have somebody who understands that, that will be a layer of protection that we otherwise would not have, right? Both in terms of veto and in terms of pardoning, um, and the whole process. So that's one element. Now, other levels of elected officials, be it at the state level, let's start at the state level. So to the extent that they're engaging with this, it's a very different process, but they have to agitate on behalf of their constituents. And we know that on this issue, where the current version of the legislature is, right? We have an opportunity to address that come elections in August and November, both with the primaries and the November general. But once the players are selected, then the game is already set, right? So it's very important to engage with the players, both in the primary and in the general, so that you have people who are sensitive to this issue and are willing to stand up for the rights of everyone. So that is absolutely key right now.
Mm. Well, with that, I know it's 6:40. I'd said we'd start with questions from the audience. I do have one last question from my end for yourself, Representative Joseph, and for your Khurram. Is first to you, Representative, is what should the public be watching for in the coming months, and why is civic engagement still important while legal challenges are ongoing?
I think about the remarks of Timothy Snyder, who wrote the book on fascism. So if people aren't familiar with it, I encourage you to check it out. And one of the things he talked about is do not obey in advance. It's important to stay engaged. It's important to stay agitating. And the more people do, and we see this contemporaneously around the world, when more people speak up, the more together, the more we can fight back together, right? As opposed to just one single person, sticking their neck out. And sometimes it just takes a single person and other people agree. But it's very important that people collectively recognize that the threat on our democracy, the threat on our Constitution, the threat on the basic rights that, I can't speak for everybody here, but my family fled a dictatorship to be here, to be able to experience a level of freedom that was not present at the time, right? There's safety, there's all kinds of reasons that people come here. And all of that is in jeopardy when you start picking and choosing based on religion, based on, espousing certain ideas that you may not like, and then trying to frame it as terrorism when it has nothing to do with terrorism and just articulating basic rights. And we see that it's focused on specific countries as opposed to across the board, and that is problematic. So in the coming days, figuring out how to engage safely, right, as we're facing an increasing surveillance state is significant. On top of that, you have, it's a moving target at the federal level. You have lots of executive orders that are directly relevant to this conversation. You have lots of pending legislation in Congress, integrating, US military and Israeli military. You have so many things that are potentially problematic and directly impact what we're talking about.
Mm, Thank you. Thank you. So it would be the same question for you, and being what should the public be watching for in the coming months, and why civic engagement is still important while legal challenges are ongoing?
So what's coming up is I am very confident there's going to be legal challenges because the statute becomes effective law on July 1st, 2026, so a few weeks from now. I would say that I know the First Amendment Foundation is planning to file a suit, as I said earlier, and I am pretty confident that whenever the state of Florida starts designating entities, that a number of groups will jump in to file suit challenging the constitutionality of this law. I do think that the other thing that's going to happen is we're going to have a real chilling effect of students on campus who are trying to, when you're in college, and I know when I was in college, the one of the things that's so great is it's an opportunity for really get involved in a community of like-minded folks that you can find, because it's such a big community there, and you can find the folks who maybe agree with you on something and then get together and then advocate for something. And we learn how to advocate. We learn civic engagement through our life, through our younger life. And I feel really sad for those who feel like, look, now I have to not engage in anything because of this potential threat of getting charged with something here. And especially if you're a foreign student, you come to America, the land of the free, the First Amendment land, and you're like everyone's gonna be telling you, keep your mouth shut, don't go to any rallies, don't go to anything, keep your head down. It's very sad, and it just reminds me of that Ben Franklin quote, because this is all being done in the name of security. And look, there's nobody who wants security right now more than the Muslim American community. That shooting in San Diego would not have been prevented if this bill was in place over there. The shootings against the Jewish community in Pittsburgh and in DC would not have been prevented if this bill was in place. And Ben Franklin once said, those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little bit of safety deserve neither liberty or safety. And I feel like that's the moment we're in if we don't decide otherwise.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much for your response there. We're going to start taking questions from the audience. We already have a handful. And if folks like, please feel free to share any questions that you have, either in the comments or via the Q&A button. The first one I'll throw out, and whoever would like dibs on it, you have the virtual floor. Could the criteria used for this designation process also be applied to organizations that promote anti-Muslim rhetoric or hostility towards Muslims? And how are comparable instances of anti-Muslim hate speech or incitement treated under the law?
I'll take a stab first, which is, could it be used? It could be, sure. Would it be used? That's a different question. I think that the process is secretive, so we will not know what is how one made the sausage that turns out to be I designate you or you. So theoretically, yes, this could be applied to anyone who also is a threat to any community, or it could be applied to anyone who's not a threat to anybody, but it's simply espousing their opinion.
Dottie, on that note, is there anything you'd like to add, or should we move on to the next one? Sorry, I think you're still on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah, I was trying to take a look at the bill language. So I want to give you an accurate answer. I feel like I just agree with what was said, but I want to make sure if there's any specific things that would make that not possible. My instinct is there may be some specific language. I remember reading it, but I don't know if I'm mixing up bills. So I'll come back to that let me look at, I want to give you an actual answer instead of just speaking off the cuff.
No, I appreciate that. And then if just as a note, is if we don't have enough time for all of the questions, we'll definitely make note and follow up with everybody with those responses, including this particular question. So the next one is Texas Governor Greg Abbott has declared CARE as a terrorist organization. How are the Florida laws different from that in Texas? And what should other states do to prevent these kinds of laws?
So Texas, Greg Abbott did it as an executive order. It was not through legislative action. Our governor did the same thing originally last, whenever it was, year somewhere, that they designated, he designated CARE Florida through an executive order. That has no legal effect. It just is an opinion, and the only effect is political, right? Which is that if you're if CARE Florida, or in that case CARE Texas, is in some way connected to something government, the government can just say, well, we're not going to work with you anymore, and stop doing that. So if you're on the board of CARE Florida, and you're on the in your appointment, you were appointed to school board or something, or another calendar committee or something, then the rep who appointed you could say, okay, well, I don't want to have you there anymore because I think you might, because the governor designated the entity you're a part of. So that's what happened last year. This is different, and Texas doesn't have this version of it, which is an actual statute passed by the legislature, and codified in, I think at count, it was either 11 or 14 different statutes are impacted by this bill. It cites and amends somewhere between 11 and 14 other statutes. So this has a far more reaching impact than that mostly political executive order action.
All right, so I'll just circle back on the last question since I got a chance to take a look. I'm halfway through the bill, and I agree that, I mean, in theory it could be used. In practice, depending on who's there, it's not likely to be used in the reverse to flip it. So that was all.
No, I appreciate you. Thank you very, very much for that. The next question that we have, Representative, is, can digital footprints be an issue, such as social media activity, posts, videos, comments, shared or online affiliations? Can those materials potentially be examined as a consequence under 1471?
I mean, anything is potentially examined depending on how they do it, but they haven't laid out the details of what the process looks like, what will be taken into account, what will not be taken into account. There are no rules of evidence designated. There's no rules of procedure designated. So as of right now, anything could be included in what they're calculating. People should be very careful about their digital footprint these days, with everything going on. So yes, and try as best as you can to find ways to communicate securely and all those things. But at the end of the day, if people really want to come at you, they're going to find what you're doing, right? Or not doing, and who your affiliations are. The
Mm.
connections are just overwhelming. Now, that does not mean that we cede our reasonable expectation of privacy under the Fourth Amendment. And I specifically affirm mine, and I encourage you to continue to affirm yours. But at the end of the day, it depends on how the actual procedure goes, not just in terms of this process laid out in this legislation, but once you make it to the courts and what that looks like. Because the court procedures are one thing, but we've seen whenever they start invoking words like terrorists, then all of a sudden different rules come into play that really undermine some of the constitutional protections that we're used to.
Thank you for that. This next question, Khurram, is throw it to you first, and then we'll see if Rep. Joseph has anything to add to it. Is should college Muslim student associations and high school Muslim student associations be concerned and worried with this law being enacted July 1st? And should they consider changing their legal entity names?
Not about the name. So no, it's not about the name. So should they be concerned? Just like everyone should be concerned. Students definitely should be concerned because there's a whole half of this bill which just is about student groups. I think that there's already a lot of, surveillance of Muslim student groups, and other student groups like Black Lives Matter groups and Dream Defenders and things like that. I think there's already a lot of surveillance on campus. I think that this is a tool that can be used against such student groups, all of those student groups. And because of that, they're unfortunately going to have to be more thoughtful and conscious about how they advocate and how they express their opinions, and to make sure that they do their best to record everything, to make sure that they have a way to document that they were, that it was just words, no violence, no intent to incite violence. It might be that our president can do that, but those student groups can't do that. So it's important for us to also help all these student groups to the best of our ability, and I would say that a lot of the advocacy groups, the nonprofits, the groups that go around doing know your rights, they should be reaching out to the student group and saying, look, we're here to try and help educate you as best we can.
Thank you, Rep. Joseph. Did you have anything on that note?
Nope, I second everything that was said.
Much love and appreciation. See, I don't believe we've gotten any other questions in from the audience. I'm gonna ask just one more question, and we'll close it out. Is first, I'll pose it to you, Representative Joseph. Is the law creates penalties for students who are found to have, quote unquote, promoted a designated organization? And I know we touched on this earlier, but how clear is that standard, and what effect could it have on free speech and association on campuses?
Um, when I say it's clear as mud, that's how clear it is. So when terms aren't clearly defined, which it is not in this legislation, people are often left trying to guess where the line is. And when students are worried about potential consequences, they may decide that it's safer just not to participate at all, right? student groups, actually students themselves, forget just student groups, can avoid having conversations, participating in organizations or activities out of just fear that their actions or words could be misunderstood, right? That's stifling, your educational growth. It's limiting the marketplace of ideas, and it's actually stunting mental and educational growth and social growth, right? Part of the whole point of being at school is to challenge your assumptions and to see different perspectives and to hear things that challenge you. And if you take that out, the whole thing is a lesser experience, right? Students shouldn't wonder whether exercising their rights or just exploring ideas could put them at risk, whether it's for immigration consequences, being expelled, or any of the things that are listed in this bill.
Mhm. Thank you. Khurram, did you have anything to add to that question in regards to really the understanding of the definition of promote in this bill and then what effect it could have on free speech and associations on campus?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that, the bill does have some version of a definition of promote, but it's very vague. Promote involves supporting violence or providing material support with specific context considerations. So, I don't know what that means. I don't have a clue what that means. So I think that it's important for us to understand when just pragmatically when we're uh, trying to counsel folks who might be in a situation where they may run afoul of this, right? Is that promote is so vague that really any advocacy for something that would be uh, opposed to what this government wants could fall into that. And it's important that we understand on either side of the aisle that that's unacceptable. This is not a left issue. It's not a Muslim issue for sure. It is a Florida issue. It affects all Floridians and quite frankly, all Americans, because if this type of stuff is allowed to pass muster, then it'll spread like a weed throughout the country. Some other states have such bills that have become law, and there are examples over and over again that every time it's used, these domestic terrorism laws, it's used to quell some type of objection, political objection to something going on. I think the case that comes to mind is it's called the Cop City case. It's out of Georgia, and basically they were building the police were building some sort of training center, and there were a lot of folks who protested. And the domestic terrorism bill in Georgia was used to essentially arrest like 60 people. And it turned into a lawsuit. This was in 2023, and it's still ongoing, challenging the law. And of course, trying to defend those folks and the consequences that come from them. And it was just for protesting a government action that they didn't want to see happen in their neighborhood. That's how it's going to be used in Florida. We have a lot of examples of that, and we should not really shy away from confronting this and speaking out against it. Just keeping your head in the sand is not an option.
Absolutely. Thank you very, very, very much to both you and Representative Joseph for y'all's answers on a lot of these questions. Prior to closing out, we do have one call to action to everybody on this that has joined this panel is to go to the First Amendment Foundation's website and to subscribe to their email listserv. By doing so, we are supporting their lawsuit and fighting these bills in the courts. It'll take less than 10 seconds to do so. There's a subscribe button in the corner of their website. We shared the website in the comments below, and then we'll ensure to follow up with everybody with that information. after the panel. And thank you to everybody in the audience. Thank you again to our panelists, to Representative Joseph, Karam Wahed, Nubrith, and of course to our national policy team in helping put this together. And again, to everybody for being here. Y'all's time is very much so appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.